I'm not claiming for a minute to be the master of the thumbnail or anything. I have plenty of crappy thumbnails on my channel. Sometimes that's because they're rushed. Sometimes that's because I just don't have a good idea for a thumbnail. Sometimes I just flat out suck at what I do. However, I think I know enough about making thumbnails to spot when it's being done badly. When a YouTuber has a bad thumbnail, that's one thing. Resources for any given YouTuber are limited. But when a major studio production is being sold to us with a trash tier, lazy piece of shit thumbnail, that to me is a bigger issue. Scrolling through Amazon, I can spot a lot of garbage thumbnails, and they tend to fit into a few distinctive categories. As we proceed, you'll probably notice that some of these thumbnails fall into multiple of these categories. Category 1, thumbnails that don't capture the spirit of the film or show that they're representing. Remember, a thumbnail could very possibly be the first impression of your intellectual property. It could be the first thing a potential viewer sees. They might see your thumbnail before they've seen a single trailer or read or watched a single review or heard any word of mouth about your product or anything like that. The thumbnail you use to sell a movie or show might very well be the first impression you make. Many thumbnails, in my reckoning, do not make a good first impression. Look at this thumbnail for Secret of NIMH, for instance. Anyone familiar with this film should be able to tell you right away what a terrible thumbnail this is. NIMH is a dark, dramatic story full of striking horror visuals. This makes it look like it's just another cute little cartoon mouse movie. This thumbnail doesn't attract the right audience. Anyone, child or adult, who wants to see a cute mouse cartoon is going to be shitting their pants watching the actual content of this film. Anyone looking for something with dark visuals and a deep storyline is going to take one look at this thumbnail and completely write off the possibility that this might be the film to scratch that itch. Let's look at a much newer film. This is the movie Spree, which was recently released to Amazon Prime as an early access Joe Keery vehicle, wherein he plays a rideshare driver so desperate for social media attention that he comes up with a plan to live stream himself on a murder spree. The thumbnail doesn't really convey to me that I'm looking at a horror movie. The font looks bland, the picture of his face looks mildly creepy, but nothing about it screams murderer. I've never seen this film, but the trailer contains scenes of him covered in blood, looking contemplatively at a knife. The selling point of this movie is obviously, hey, you want to see the guy from Stranger Things murder people? And this thumbnail doesn't convey that. I passed this thumbnail by for a couple of weeks without ever even realizing it was a horror film. I honestly thought it was some kind of sports movie. Like, maybe, because he looks sweaty. Now, maybe that conclusion was a little silly on my part, but the whole point of a thumbnail is for people to look at it, form an immediate impression, and then their eyes scan on to the next one. So if you don't convey information quickly, you really don't convey it at all. Here's the same picture used in a much better promotional image that actually tells the story. We see the bloody handprint on the seat. We see that he's looking back at us, the viewer, who are apparently bleeding in the back seat of his car. We're seeing him through a phone screen, and we're seeing that whatever is happening to us is being broadcast live. The image, uncropped, makes full sense. We'll talk more about bad crops later. When you get rid of every element of this poster other than Joe Keery's goofy-ass face, you rob it of its power. True, you can technically still see some of the bloody handprint, but did you notice it? If so, you're more astute than me. Congratulations. Here's a much better crop of the image that still conveys the necessary information. I think that some variation of this thumbnail was what they were going for on Amazon, but the aspect ratio of Amazon's thumbnails and the stupid early access banner at the bottom both hid some pretty relevant information. Category 2, lazily cropped thumbnails. For older films especially, it seems that there is often a tendency to take existing promotional art, often from VHS or DVD covers, and simply crop it into a thumbnail size. Look at this thumbnail for Hollow Man. It's just a crop of the DVD cover. Nothing else has been altered. Sometimes they do make alterations beyond just the simple crop, but they're awful. Look what they did to Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey. Not only did they crop the DVD cover, but they slapped the title on top of Bill and Ted's faces. Isn't it sort of an unwritten rule that the title of the film shouldn't cover up the lead actors' faces? Sometimes the crop doesn't even look remotely good, but they still go with it. Saving Silverman had a pretty awful cover to begin with, but at least it makes some half-ass compositional sense. Look at what happens when you crop it. No one with even an ounce of artistic talent would create something like this. The characters are shoved into the lower third. In Steve Zahn's case, he's shoved into the lower fourth. Would anyone with even a sliver of artistic ability who was composing a thumbnail from scratch ever choose to compose it like this? I mean, art is subjective, sure, but I'd still like to say no. It's hardly a great classic of cinema, but look at how badly they fucked this one up. 1982's Madman. A figure looming over you in the doorway with an axe in his hands, crazed hair, the title in big, bold, red lettering, Madman. The thumbnail? I'll give them some credit. They added some blood spatter and they added a little texture and color to the title, but all you can see of the figure now is some crazy hair on his head. It's not nearly as interesting or frightening as seeing his full figure looming in that doorway. Or check out this thumbnail for Slumber Party Massacre. I grant you it retains some of its power. You still have that element of phallophobia, and you can still see that it's a horror film, of course, but look at this uncropped version of the box art. I mean, wow, that's so much better. Everything conveyed in the cropped version is conveyed so much more profoundly here. The scene being painted is so much more vivid and evocative. Designing art for a poster or a VHS or a DVD is very different compositionally than designing art for a thumbnail. Because when you design a poster or some box art, you're dealing with more vertical space and less horizontal space. A thumbnail is the opposite. You're dealing with a lot more of this and a lot less of this. As a result, most attempts to crop existing posters or VHS or DVD cover art to adapt them into thumbnails comes across as awkward. Unfortunately, the terrible cropping isn't the only method of repurposing old poster or box art into thumbnail art. Category 3, thumbnails that try to incorporate the old poster or box art with minimal or no cropping. When they realize they can't shove a square peg in a round hole, they just slap the square peg on top of the round hole and hope no one notices. Well, sorry, but I noticed. Star Trek the Motion Picture on VHS. Special longer edition? Fuck you, it was long enough. Anyway, how can we get this cover on a thumbnail? No problem. We'll just create a bunch of negative space on both sides of it. Voila, instant thumbnail. Certainly doesn't strike me as completely lazy. But it's not like Star Trek is a major property you want to treat with care and respect or anything, right? Oh, hey, dope cover, I'm still here. The way you just slap the DVD cover onto the middle and blurred everything around it really just works for me. Certainly strikes me as the sort of effort that a studio would put into a promotional image for a movie they want to sell me for $12.99. Oh, good job, House of a Thousand Corpses. The way you shrouded the thumbnail in darkness and turned the box art a little bit askew totally hides the fact that you just slapped the DVD cover onto the middle of the thumbnail. You really fooled me. Sometimes they just shove the box art to one side and fill up the negative space with the title, like they did it for this movie Hot Rod. Let me show you how devoid of effort this thumbnail truly is. So I just copy an image of this fucking DVD cover. I'm gonna fucking enlarge it. I don't know why there's two. Go away, other one. You're not necessary. Take that. I don't know why there's all this gray shit around it. We'll get rid of all that really quick. Because obviously whoever was given the job of making this thumbnail probably had access to higher quality versions of this shit. Dude, make sure his hair stays good. Okay, there we go. So let me just copy that. I'll move my copy over here. And I'll just fucking erase the original because I don't need it. Control T that shit. Nice and big. All right. Hot Rod. There you go. Oh, it's Hot Rod. Okay. So there's my thumbnail. I guess I'm cutting off a little bit of the bike there. So let me just cover up that mistake as lazily as possible by just extending it to the bottom. Boom. There we go. So there it is. Let me make it a little smaller so you see it thumbnail size. So there's the thumbnail I just made. There's the thumbnail from Amazon Prime. Like, you see what I'm saying here? Like, you guys literally just saw me make that in like a second, and I'm slow at Photoshop. There's people who probably could have made this thing in like 10, 15, 20 seconds. Like, it's that fucking easy to do. Like, there's no effort here. It's like just total laziness. Look at this garbage thumbnail from Tales from the Crypt, Bordello of Blood. Not only do they shove the DVD box art to one side and then slap the title on the other, they didn't even choose the good version of the cover art. I mean, this exists and this exists, but they use this? Were they trying to make me avoid this movie? Were they embarrassed that they made it, so they're trying to convince you not to watch it? I mean, if so, that's totally fair. Bordello of Blood is pretty ass. Dennis Miller's comedy has aged about as gracefully as his politics, and for a movie with Bordello right in the title, the movie is seriously lacking in the sort of carnal titillation that would have, maybe helped to mask its deficits a little bit. Ugh. Labyrinth, what have they done? David Bowie, Jennifer Connelly, Jim Henson, all that talent involved in this classic film, and the best you could do for the thumbnail is a recycled fucking VHS cover? Badly cropped? I mean, what disrespect. This film definitely deserves better. Really, in my opinion, any film deserves better than this. Category 4, thumbnails with too much going on. Thumbnails are meant to be small. That's why they're called thumbnails. And with that small size comes a certain necessity to keep things simple. An image that works for a promotional still or a DVD cover or a poster or whatever doesn't automatically work as a thumbnail. Luckily, this sort of bad thumbnail doesn't seem to be too common. It seems like most people get this. But you definitely see more of like the bad crops or the lazy repurposing of box art. But this can certainly also be a problem. I'll limit myself to one example on this one for the sake of brevity. Look at the cover of this documentary. This is called Lost Soul, The Doomed Journey of Richard Stanley's Island of Dr. Moreau. This thumbnail's a mess. The title is largely illegible. There's way too much detail, like fine detail, that you really can't scrutinize in a thumbnail. When I look at it, I can't help but like squint. Like, what's going on? Category 5, thumbnails that are overly minimalistic. You know, minimalism in a thumbnail can definitely be effective, so I don't want to dismiss that technique, just across the board. Like, a good example is this thumbnail for The Professional. I think that works. You want to see minimalism done wrong? How about this? Yeah, there's minimalism, and then there's no one gave a shit-ism. You seen The Frighteners with Michael J. Fox? Great movie, underrated. Deserves a lot better than this. And yeah, on top of being lazy minimalism, it's also another example of slapping vertically oriented box art onto a horizontally oriented thumbnail. The thumbnail for this documentary about the life of civil rights icon John Lewis is, to me, overly minimalistic. There's so much negative space that my eye is more drawn to that than it is to John Lewis. And it's almost impossible to read the sign around his neck from any distance. It's just barely legible. How about this one? I mean, this can't even be right, can it? It looks like there was some kind of error. I think this category is more debatable than the others, but in my opinion, most thumbnails with a character that's simply standing in front of a very flat, matte backdrop are pretty dull. Sure, they do create contrast, I'll give them that, but they do it in pretty much the laziest way possible. Like I said, minimalism can be done well, but most of the time, I'm just not a fan. Category 6, thumbnails where the title or some of the other text is illegible or hard to read. Do me a favor, okay? Tell me what it says under Dog Soldiers. Afterwards, we can watch Street Survivors, the true story of The Leonard Skinnerd plane crash? Okay. No? More of an ICP fan, maybe. Let's watch Big Money Rustlers featuring, or you know what we could watch? You get the idea. Moving on. Category 7, thumbnails where the actors are just standing around. You know what's 1,000 times more interesting than a character from a film doing something? A character from the same film doing goddamn absolutely nothing. I'm being sarcastic, of course. Don't get me wrong, sometimes this can work. I guess, like this cover from The Dead Zone, where Christopher Walken's just kind of standing there in the middle of this cold, white frame. It expresses to me the loneliness and isolation of his character. I'm talking about crap like this. Wow, this movie, Vivarium, looks interesting, right? Apparently people stand around in it with no discernible expressions on their faces. Count me in. The Bounty. Maybe it's a good movie, but this thumbnail is about as interesting as a roll of Bounty paper towels. It's obviously just trying at this time to capitalize on the star power of Mel Gibson and Anthony Hopkins, but honestly, it took me a minute to even realize that was Mel Gibson. Their expressions are lackluster. I guess Hopkins looks a little bit mischievous. Gibson looks like a ham sandwich, though. The Twilight movies, on top of being unwatchable films, are awful offenders in this category. Every single one of them is just the three principal characters standing around like they're posing for a magazine. Category 8, thumbnails where the composition or elements are just plain off. And this one's kind of hard to explain. I don't really have a formal background in art education or anything like that, so maybe I just can't express what's wrong here. But, just look at this. Like, what's going on? Is she's a lion inside? Really, it looks like she's wearing a lion as a parka, or she's got like a lion-shaped tumor sticking out of her neck. The composition is just weird. Nothing seems balanced. Why does the last third of the image have like a faint background when nothing else does? Why is part of her body missing? Just why, right? Like, what the hell is this garbage? What am I supposed to get from this? The only thing I'm getting is I don't want to see it. Category 9, bland thumbnails that don't intrigue you. So the primary purpose of the thumbnail is to get you to click on it. So you'd think that there'd be some effort made to make them look interesting, but often that is not the case. The thumbnail for Clue, the movie, just arranges cropped photos on a yellow background. Like, really? That's the best you could do to sell this fucking movie? Like, Tim Curry's in this. Just put Tim Curry on the cover. Here's the exact same technique, but with black instead of yellow. I guess there's a bit more structure to this one. At least the character crops seem to have some size uniformity. But who looks at this cover and thinks, yeah, I bet this is worth my time? Like, what's the logic? It's got humans in it? That's my kind of movie? Human movie. What's the selling point of this? Romance, I guess? I'm already puking my guts out just looking at the cover, so I can't imagine actually spending time with these characters, but whatever. Maybe that one's just down to my personal taste. I guess it's at least expressing something. This one isn't. Hell, this one Oscars. And just look at this thumbnail. Nothing. Just a wash it out yellow cover of a bunch of people standing around. By the way, this one would also be a shoe-in for my next category, which is Category 10, thumbnails with no depth or contrast to them. So, an example of a thumbnail with depth is this one for Adam Sandler's Happy Gilmore. I'm not going to claim this is a perfect thumbnail. I don't think the title pops much. But you feel like there are multiple layers here. There's a fourth wall, which is where you are, where you exist as the observer. It's oriented around the ground. It's almost like you're sticking your head up out of the golf hole. The ball is so close to you that it's obstructing your view of Happy. Then there's Happy, who's behind the ball, partially obstructed. Behind him is the crowd. Behind them is the sky. You've got multiple layers of defined objects whose spatial relationships are reasonably clear. Compare that to a thumbnail for The Amulet, which looks utterly flat. The subject and the background seem to exist on roughly the same plane. Nothing much delineates them. There's no depth or contrast here. The bland pink font is really the only color, and it only serves to drive home how underwhelming this all is. This is the thumbnail for John Wick, and while it doesn't create a huge amount of depth, it does create a good amount of contrast. John stands out from the murky background. The title stands out from both John and the background. This thumbnail has some pop to it. Compare that to the thumbnail from Godzilla, King of the Monsters. Have you ever seen Godzilla look so small? You know why? Because there's nothing that we can compare him to in terms of size. We see clouds, or maybe there's smoke, but we don't really know how big they are. Godzilla is essentially the same color as the background, too. So there's no contrast here. It's just blue piled on blue. The thing that honestly pops out the most to me is not Godzilla, but the HBO logo. You know why? Because it's the only thing that's not fucking blue. Well, anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you can think of some more terrible thumbnail techniques out there, let me know. If you feel I was wrong about anything, let me know so I can correct you. And I ask you to rate, comment, subscribe, hit the alert bell, stay in the loop, check out my podcast, check out my Patreon, check out my social media. There's all kinds of shit that I need you to do. All the relevant links can be found in the description down below. I am the amazing thumbnail critic. Peace the fuck out.